Hello, everyone. It's with a heavy heart that I share our good friend E.Jay Miranda passed away due to COVID-19 complications since the recording of this episode. E.Jay was an incredible person, full of positivity. He had a spirited adventure and a smile that brightened up every room he walked into. This episode is now meant to celebrate his life and to share the light he had, which inspired so many. Drop in the untold stories of industry leaders, influencers, and insights on future innovation. I'm John Davidson, and this is the DLC Drop Podcast. All right, E.Jay Miranda, thank you so much for joining me today on the DLC Drop Podcast, all the way from the Philippines. I want to say that you are probably the guest that has been furthest from the studio when we're recording.
Really?
So welcome.
Can we mention the time right now? Because it's not that I'm trying to look for a little bit of
sympathy?
Look at that guy. He's maybe. No, it's fine.
Yes, For those who are just listening and not watching to this episode, let's note, number one, that E.Jay looks great for being up at 1:30 in the morning to join us on this episode from the Philippines. So extra effort. You get extra points, my man.
Well, you offered to fly me in, but COVID and vaccinations, and it's a little complicated here. And the budget, I guess, but I'm just being cheeseballing. I'm sorry. No, it's a pleasure, and in the gamer world that I'm living in now, this is actually normal time, and they usually sleep by 3 or 4. So I should be actually somewhat used to this, but it's just smile.
Yeah, this should be your peak, right? Like, aren't you usually streaming right now? I mean, it's 1:30 in the morning. Isn't this peak time for?
It absolutely is, because we do. The group does a lot of international broadcasts for tournaments and a lot of European events. So you can imagine how late that translates. 5-6 hours. Some of the tournaments last until 5 a.m. And it's pretty wild to see how many gamers stay up to watch it with our streams. So
that's one of the unique things about such a global sport is, we don't typically see this. The NFL sometimes has a game in London or whatever. Obviously, soccer, football is very international, but I don't think there's anything more international than esports. And you see the audience, how passionate they are. Getting up and watching or playing at whatever time is determined. Is that right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'll give another sport example. We love watching Manny Pacquiao box. It doesn't matter what side of politics you stand on, but
True.
Literally on a Sunday morning, because most fights are Saturday nights, the streets will be empty and everyone will literally be inside watching Manny box. And if he wins, we all step out to the streets and we celebrate. And then we go to church and then go to brunch. But before that, it's very much we're going to watch Manny fight, which is a really, that's a very pride, Filipino pride thing for us. So, yeah, we love it.
Absolutely. I know a little bit about Manny Pacquiao. When I lived in Washington, D.C., I always talk about I worked at this tax firm, Beers and Cutler, that really opened my eyes to the business world, and that it could be a positive experience. And my best friend, who I sat next to, was from the Philippines. Jamil Madrid, shout out. Haven't talked to him in a while, but we're still connected on LinkedIn. But he would talk about Manny Pacquiao like this guy was a god, and he shared a few other things about the Philippines, which I'm excited to dig in with you here. Obviously, I have a very outsider's perspective, but let's get started here with your career. You had an outsider's perspective as well, from what I understand. You're born and bred in the United States of America, and you had an opportunity to open up the market of the Philippines for Red Bull, which is such an incredible item on the resume there, and I'm sure a lot of great experiences that we're excited to share. But tell us how this journey started and brought you to where you are today.
Okay, that's a lot of really fun points. Let's see if I can summarize this without dozing off, because it's 1:40 a.m. So starting up with college, I had gotten myself busy with school full time and wrestling for the college team. And then on the side of that, I would volunteer and then substitute teach at an inner city school. which is really an interesting dynamic, as you can imagine, from schooling to teaching high school. And yeah.
Where was this, by the way, in the U.S.?
This was Huntsville, Texas, also known as prison capital of the world, which is something that they're quite proud of. So
there you go.
Yeah, I think there's about 11 prisons in the vicinity of Huntsville. So
don't mess with Texas, but more specifically, don't mess with Huntsville is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, I think I came around to looking for a summer job in between some time, and me and my friends were talking a good way to make money, and then we started talking about easy ideas, and then someone said, "Oh, you should try working for an energy drink." And then I found myself on the Red Bull website, and I applied, and somehow they thought I would be interesting choice to be a campus rep in college for them.
Nice.
And to be honest, this was a really good stepping point for me because I've always been quite shy and introverted. So I was even more surprised why they picked me to kind of be their rep. But through that experience in college, I found myself volunteering for as many events as possible and doing some nationwide activations with them, just as a volunteer, working the grunt work, simply because of how amazing and how exciting I thought it all was. And, I thought I was learning, and it's a lot cooler when you get to see all these really cool events and famous people, and you're just a college student in a small prison city in Texas, and you get to see all this stuff. So
heck yeah.
What a really great way to highlight my college career and kind of set me on that path. But when I graduated from college, I think it was one of the recessions during that time in the States, and finding a job was just really quite tricky. So 3 months in, I was able to land a position in Leesburg, Virginia, 45 minutes outside of DC.
Yeah.
And in a 12-hour notice, when they said you got the job, I booked my flight and went. So I was really crazy to just pick up and go in the middle of Virginia, nowhere. And I remember one of my more funnier stories is I was looking for a cheap place to stay because I didn't have much income coming in. So I ended up finding Craigslist. I think that's what they call it in the States.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
I found a basement booking for $300 a month with a immigrant family from Turkey. And that was my first foray into post-college life in Virginia, small town city with a Turkish family in a basement, and just making my way through the grind. So 2-3 job positions later, we had talked about this earlier. I had randomly found myself working in the 2012 U.S. elections, surprisingly. And I was working for a post-production agency that was doing a lot of the ad reels for both Republicans, but mostly Democrats. So I had a lot of political figures coming through and politicians doing, radio spiels and whatnot. And my job basically was to kind of run the books and do all the coordinations for all the bookings and the politicians in their offices. And 18, 20-hour days, hot dogs, because I didn't make enough money then either. But just knowing that, the things that I was getting to do was literally being seen by the rest of the world. And I was really empowered by that. I think about 3 months before the end of the elections, I had gotten a message from Asia. There's a really great leader and visionary. His name is Daniel Beatty. He was the marketing head for Asia at the time. And he emailed me because there had been some dialogue in Austria with some of the branding leadership about who could help come into the Philippines and help launch and kind of stabilize the market.
And you're talking about Red Bull in this situation, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yep. Exactly. Sorry, I'm kind of piecing the pieces now.
You're good.
And I had developed quite the reputation in the States, even as a college student, simply because I was the guy that loved to volunteer, just work really hard. And, I really appreciated Daniel's email to me when he sent it, because he said, we're looking for someone that can roll up their sleeves and kind of get into the trenches and just build something out of nothing.
And we hear you work for free. Just kidding. Hopefully I didn't say that.
At least more than hot dogs every week, but it's okay. It's just part of the journey.
Right.
So anyways, I was excited for the opportunity. I put together, a quick deck, got to interview quite a few. And 2 weeks before the end of the elections, they actually said they needed me to come to the Philippines right away. And, in the back of my mind, I was like, how am I going to explain this one to the office? So I had to push back, and I told the team that if you can allow me to wait until the elections and hopefully, our candidate wins, Obama in this case, because we were majorly Democratic in terms of our services, then I will be on the first flight out and you can see me in the Philippines. So Obama won. I got the congratulations sent our way. And then 5 days later, with literally four dress slacks and 2 pairs of shoes and some shirts, because I just didn't really have much of anything else. I got to escape to the Philippines for 2 weeks for an ocular visit. Met with the local team, really understanding the situation that they were in. And when I flew back to the States, they said that, I got the job, and as soon as I could start, I could go. And that's basically my journey from college to Red Bull in the Philippines. So crazy.
If I would summarize that in one sentence, it would be, hold on, Red Bull. I can't move across the world yet because I have to re-elect the sitting president of the United States. Okay, we did that. Here I come. How's that for a summary?
I think we're probably making me look a lot bigger than I actually did in the States. I was just happy to be a part of the wheel that turned the system. But more importantly, what a fantastic experience to see how important a city like DC is for the rest of the world, especially in that time and period where politics can just be so engaging and so consuming.
Right.
And to see how that engine, how much influence and money came through was just, wow, what an experience to be a part of.
Absolutely. I've had a couple of years in Washington, D.C. area myself, and it's an amazing place. And to see the whole world really come there. You talk about the Turkish family, right, that you moved in with. That's case in point there. Also, just a brief tangent. I want to say the best food that I've had as far as variety goes and authenticity goes, as far as where I've lived, I have not lived in New York City, so I can't comment there. But Washington, D.C., you have so many cultures coming together. There's this place in D.C. I remember was my favorite. It's called Super Chicken. They had Peruvian chicken, and that place was just incredible. Similar experience, or am I off?
I'm sure it's great, but I didn't make much money then. So all I can really tell you is that on Sundays, I would treat myself to a nice sit-in meal, like $10. Right. And I would eat that meal really, really slow because I'm thinking to myself, this is the only good meal I'm going to have all week because I got to eat hot dogs and eggs the next day. So
that's true. You're telling me, John, the hot dogs taste the same no matter where in the United States you live. I get that too. So let's go back to the Philippines. So you arrived in the Philippines, and what was the situation there when you arrived?
So it's a really interesting brand story, but basically I arrived 2 months after they had attempted to launch the market. And of course, the way that Red Bull loves to do, which they come in with a lot of big projects and activations and basically go pew, 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 pew.
Yeah.
Which, it's, but I think for the team there, they quickly learned some very complicated issues with the market. And without giving too many secrets, I think some of the big learnings that they had was, there's actually a competitor in the market that's called Red Bull that looks like Red Bull, but is not actually it's not in the same group. It's like sister companies, but very much a competitor. So one of the first learnings for everyone is that if we spend a whole lot of money doing a whole lot of projects, but people don't know the difference between the European and international version versus the bottle, we might actually be feeding the other guy. And I think that was one of the big lessons that they had realized. Oh my goodness, I don't think people still get that this is actually the bottle, the can, not the bottle.
Wow.
So that's an interesting thought, right?
That's a unique, for those of us in the States, that's probably a unique challenge. I remember volunteering on a trip going to Mexico. We're like building houses and churches and stuff like this with high school students. We go to this place for dinner, and the mascot of their restaurant was Simba from The Lion King.
Yep.
And it was like, I don't think you can do that on the other side of the border. Is that something that is common in the Philippines where you're seeing globally recognized brands that are very similar, or was this kind of a one-off in that situation?
I think to give you the pretense, the Philippines is considered one of the most Americanized countries in Southeast Asia. I think that had a lot to do with World War II, when the U.S. armies came through to defend against the Japan's takeover, and a lot of stories from there. And I think until for about 100 years, the U.S. was in occupancy of the Philippines. And during that time, there was a really big exchange of cultures and ideas. Philippines is also known as the basketball capital of Southeast Asia, or even Asia, simply because of that influx and that import. So what is really fun about the Philippines is that we love to take what other people are doing and kind of give it our own little Filipino twist, because we're very cool like that. So maybe the two examples I can give you is that if you order a hot dog in the States, you get yourself a bun dog with a few fixings and ketchup or whatnot. But in the Philippines, we don't really bother with the bun. We just say, order me a hot dog. And it's literally a hot dog and a stick with the ketchup like this, and you have to just bite and go. So it always makes me laugh.
Yeah, low carb, right? I mean, I think that's where people are going anyway over here.
That too. My other second favorite one is ice cream sandwiches, because in the States, ice cream sandwiches, the cookie and the ice cream on top. In the Philippines, because sometimes the cookies are kind of hard to get, we'll actually take some pandesal bread, and then we'll cut it in half and then put the ice cream on it, and we'll call it an ice cream sandwich. So literally, they take it too far with kind of localisms, but yeah. Yeah,
quite literally an ice cream sandwich.
Yeah. So I hope that gives a bit of an idea of how much fun it is in the Philippines with the localisms and the takes on kind of outside culture. It's pretty fun, actually.
Take the best of both worlds, mash them together, make something new out of it. I'm all about it.
Awesome.
So when we talked earlier, I remember one thing that you shared was that, I believe you're half Filipino yourself. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir. Half Bisaya and half Puerto Rican, to be specific. So interesting mix.
So people in the U.S. would say that you're Filipino, but you went to the Philippines for the first time, having never been there or part of the culture or speaking the language, from what I understand. What was going there and thinking, okay, I'm this American, I'm going to call the shots, or I'm going to do this, that, and then realizing, wait a minute, that's not quite how it works here?
I've got a confession to make, actually. So Red Bull did interview me about, my times in the Philippines, and they asked the question, have you been there before? And I said, yes. The truth is I was only there at 6 years old, and that my family lives in the provincial areas in the middle of the country, in Cebu. So my experience as a kid was the province life. So, the oxen walking through the roads, and very rural and just fun. So when I first thought about Manila and the job came around, I didn't really give it much concrete thought. I just got very imaginative. So I was imagining, oxen walking around Manila and a lot of horses everywhere and farmlands. And the reality is Manila is quite urbanized and quite developed, even though traffic is terrible and things are quite condensed. So it's walking into the Philippines and finally actually rooting in myself was a really big culture shock, to say the least. But the good news is that some of the more modernized parts, like where I live now in BGC, Bonifacio Global City, they've done a really good job of giving it that very, modernized, Americanized feel. So I still feel somewhat like, I'm back home, but there's a blend of the two. So
cool.
It's good. It's nice, actually.
Well, one thing I'd love to touch on, you're currently the GM of LuponWXC, which is an esports org there in the Philippines. And, a lot of the audience here either is aware of esports here in the U.S. or part of the industry themselves. What are some of the differences with esports in the Philippines besides, these times that we're talking about where, you might have to be up at crazy times if a tournament is held online somewhere else? But beyond that, you guys have a very grassroots structure that you're building another thing once again, kind of like what you did with Red Bull. Talk a little bit about the differences between the two cultures from an esports perspective.
I wish I could say I'm the forerun expert, but as a GM, mostly I'm working on the internal tweakings and kind of the adjustments and getting things set up structurally. But what I've been lucky to experience so far, and I guess get a grasp in terms of locally and compared to the States, it's just that the Philippines is very much, I'd say, 10 years behind where the States is at currently in terms of development, infrastructures,
Yeah.
team developments, and even sustainable models in order for these things to thrive. Very much in the Philippine market, there's a handful of key players that are still very much in their infancy or starting to build up to their second tiers where they can start to expand off into event productions and more regional initiatives. But it's very much Wild West, I would say, in these regards, compared to the States where you see just massive productions, huge investment levels. I was working on some PEX Day with a headquarters in California, I think called 100 Thieves, some of the most successful gaming groups in the U.S. And
That's
just to see
one.
what they develop. Exactly. It's just, I'm not going to say it's night and day, but it definitely gives us the inspiration to learn and to, guide us along as we kind of find our own path.
Question there, with it being behind from a development perspective, about 10 years, like you said, but you obviously have sightlines into what things are happening in the U.S. and how they're happening. Does that help you to build in a way to take those best practices or those learnings and not make the mistakes or the missteps that previous demographics countries that are further along in esports have? What I'm thinking of is, you see maybe esports in Korea or in Europe or in the US as it's growing, maybe didn't have a lot of other things to go by to say, we need to do this. But you maybe, and this is my question, is have the opportunity to look at these other countries who are further along from a development perspective and say, oh, they did that, I should do this. Is that helpful or is that completely off?
No, I think in an ideal world, it would be easy to pick up the phone call and talk to someone in the States and say, how did you do this? Teach us everything you know, and we'd love to replicate. I think the majority of the time, we're just more amazed and inspired by the media results and the stories and the content and the pictures. And literally the conversation goes, hey, look what they did. Can we do the same thing too?
Right.
And bridging that education gap and that knowledge and that development. Some people are luckier than others where they can recruit that kind of talent to really help form up and develop. But I think 9 times out of 10, it's a little bit of a feel inspired, feel, amazed and see what they're doing. And then let's take what we can learn and see and try to build it on our own with a bit of our own local touch.
That's a good point. You're not having like these strategy sessions with all these orgs in the US to say, hey, we're 10 years behind from a development perspective and what would you advise? The other thing that I would say is, while on the surface, esports in the US looks very polished, all these things, you've got these big tournaments, you've got these brand partners, all these things, all those teams are still trying to figure out how to be profitable and make money in the space as well. They probably just have the benefit they're receiving investment here in the U.S. and also there's a lot of brand headquarters in the U.S. that aren't, in the Philippines, and so they're able to benefit in those ways. But I know from firsthand experience, I've had people on this podcast who have said, we're trying to figure out how to do this without running out of money first. Major challenges.
Kind of feels like what I'm up to right now, actually, or at least what I'm fighting for every day. I think you hit some really, really great points there, actually. We would love to be able to pick up the phone call and talk through, but the reality is for such a unique market like the Philippines, we really have to be able to take the inspiration ideas that we see outside and find the local solutions and answers. There are a few lucky groups in the Philippines that have been able to secure, investment funds, really regional groups, especially Singapore-based, that see the potential, and we're very happy for them to kind of see that boost along. But for LuponWXC, with the group that I serve as the GM, that's something that we actually pride ourselves in, that we don't really believe in these outside investments because I think the feeling for us is that we can stay true to the scenes, true to the community. I work for a guy, his name is Kuya Nick. They call him one of the Filipino voices of Dota 2. And, I really love his story, especially getting to share with others, because he's the typical, rags, not necessarily riches, but just really starting from the ground up, just the guy at the computer shop, learning as much as he can and really having these big dreams. And, one of his mantras is that we stay authentic and we do everything, with integrity. And another big mantra is that, in terms of the decision making and how we guide the company forward, we're going to always focus on that community. So we're very much not really keen to look for outside help that don't see the same vision or that same direction, simply because I think in esports, especially in this part of the world, it can be quite, as we talked about, a little Wild West. We're still kind of finding our way through.
Sure.
And that's been one of the key decisions, but I think it's starting to pay dividends, because as we continue to do the right things, good things will come, as I like to preach to my teams. And we're starting to see more and more opportunities open up, simply because if we, the authenticity is paying off, and the grassroots and the grass steps, and as we formalize, it's really starting to appear itself. And so not everyone wants to take that path. Some people like to have the extra boost, and it
Sure.
feels really nice to have the income hit your pocket, and then you can start spending on other things. But, for us, trust the process.
Yeah,
and the process will come.
I think that's a strong message too, just from an entrepreneurial experience as well. A lot of entrepreneurs take investment. Sometimes you need it, right? You need capital to grow your business, or to acquire machinery or products, or to hire people, things like that. But when you do take that investment, now you've got bosses. Now you owe people money, right? It is nice when that when that money hits your bank account. You're like, oh, sweet, you can get the office or get whatever we need to grow our business. But guess what? They're looking for a return on that. And so, I don't know. I always say the longer you take to build the foundation, the higher you can grow, right?
Wow.
Because you've built that. You guys are really looking at the long term there, which I respect a lot. Rather than just saying, hey, how can we get that spike? A lot of dollars coming into this space. So I'm excited to see how that strategy works out for you guys.
I think we're getting close. I'm not allowed to get ahead of myself, at least with the podcast through, but I think we're in exciting times right now, because a lot of bigger groups are seeing the potential with this authentic approach and message that we have for community. And, the proposals are starting to come in now, and really these big pitches to kind of convince the bigger players in the market to say, hey, let's try not using the same playbook that the other major groups do. Let's not just throw money at things because it's going to make the dial go dink, dink.
Right.
Let's really focus more on the authenticity and the integrity in the community. And then from there, if we're in that right direction, let's scale, and then let's really develop from there. So yeah, it's not the easiest approach, but I think for us, we sleep better night knowing that we're doing things, at least we feel, the right way. So.
Yeah, I love your perspective on that. Love that approach. One thing I was taking when you were describing your career path, I wanted to go back to, is how volunteering really seemed to open up a lot of things for you. And yeah, it wasn't pretty at times, right? There was a lot of hot dogs being consumed. I'm sure you may have wished at times like, oh, I wish I had a little bit more of a paycheck. But I'm a big advocate for volunteering. People ask me all the time, John, how do I get in the space? And I always say, whether you're a new college graduate or you're a business professional, find an event around you, volunteer, do whatever they ask, because number one, they need help. Number two, you're going to build relationships. Business is so much about relationships. A lot of times it just comes down to, can I stand the person next to me who I have to work with all day? And are they even keeled so that, if things start to go sideways, we can work towards a solution versus somebody flying off the handle. Obviously, if you're funny, that's always a bonus. But the other thing I would say too, especially for young people, is you get to experience different roles, different jobs. I know when I got my first marketing job after getting my marketing degree, I was like, holy crap, this is what marketing is. Like, I got to do all these spreadsheets and measure stuff and report back. And it just was not something that I thought it was before I entered the industry. But I want you to share a little bit for our audience on the power and the opportunities that volunteering take, seeing the long game and maybe sacrificing short term with some of those finances to gain long term.
Yeah, that's so I was actually reflecting on some recent challenges and opportunities, but I think to step back first and kind of give the big picture. In the beginning of my career, I really wanted to push more coaching opportunities and really get my hands dirty with more teachings and things like this. So even in college, I was working at not an inner city school, but a kind of a last chance school where a lot of kids that were normally kicked out of normal, traditional schoolings would be sent to this private school, and they were basically the last hope. And I have a picture, and I'll send it to you after this call, of me coaching a junior high and high school basketball team where I'm the only minority in a team full of African American kids, which I always joke that I was the Asian Coach Carter, but it's just it's those little moments. But for me, I felt like if I could adopt that coaching mentality and the skills at an early age, it would somehow translate to my ability to manage and to inspire leadership and development. I think now that I'm a bit more ways into my leadership and hopefully I am, that's really up to my teams to decide on if I'm doing a good job. I think there's a lot of great development opportunities for coaching and applying that into the workplace and the leadership space. I would add the caveat that athletes, you get to make them run and do sprints, and punish them if they're hey, you need to run 10 sprints, go back and down. You didn't do that right. I think in the workplace, at least in the Philippines, and with the intercultural communications and kind of the nuances here, I have to apply a very soft tone and a very understanding tone and a very warm tone. I miss coaching, I guess is also what I'm really trying to say. But there's parallels and there's opportunities to grow. I was actually thinking about a quick story of volunteer work here in the Philippines, and something that me and Nico actually got to help out with me before joining Lupon. But we actually had a situation last August where we had this term called locally stranded individuals. And what happened is that Philippines had been going through intermittent lockdowns basically every other month. So there'd be months where we were kind of moving around, and then other months where the government would say we have to shut down.
Wow.
There was about 100 stranded individuals that were stuck in the harbor of Manila because about 2 days before a lot of the major boats were going to send people home, the government put an immediate lockdown in place and shut down any transport leaving the harbor and leaving the city.
Wow.
And unfortunately, those 100 people were kind of stuck in the harbor with nowhere to stay and nowhere to go because of finances and money. So the next best option was that they were given storage units, the shipping containers. There were 4 lined up shipping containers, and basically all 100 people were kind of situated there for some time. And unfortunately, it's also the rainy season in August. So you can imagine 100 people with water filling the containers, miserable, and not any income and resources and whatnot. So I happen to be friends with one of the documentary photographers in the country, and he posted out these photos saying, these people are stuck here for the next 2 weeks, and it's devastating.
Wow.
And my heart sunk, and I messaged the photographer and I said, look, tell me the story. What's going on? What can we do? He got me the contact to the military personnel out on the naval base, and the Coast Guard actually that was over that area had, they were really volunteering what they could, but getting extra fundings to take care of these people properly, it's just really impossible with kind of how everything is there. So
sure.
I was able to rally through, and working with the Coast Guard and some very great volunteers, we were able to get hammocks for all 100 people, and supplying them all the rice and the goods and just as many goods and clothes as items as they needed for the 2 weeks.
Wow.
Simply just because, someone needs to do something, because if we don't, they're all stuck and in trouble. I think the message I'm really trying to say here is that for a country like the Philippines, I think giving back, especially when you have way more than you realize, is just a kind of a way of life here. We have the overseas workers, the OFWs. They go abroad, they make the extra income because it's in a different country, but they send it back because, we're really a country that loves to give back and just help each other. So, and that's a mantra that we, I continue to this day. Any volunteer work, any ways, extra funds I can give. And with Lupon especially, they're also really, they have a heart for this. So we're always happy to take our extra incomes and say, look, let's do a streamathon. Let's do a 24-hour campaign where we're going to just raise a lot of money and just give it to the people that are devastated, because that's what we do.
Wow, that's incredible.
Way of life, I think, if you choose to live that kind of life.
Sure. Well, you were talking at the beginning of this episode about, we're talking about food, but, you take different cultures, the best of those, and you mash them together. And I think everybody listening, if we could take that attitude, we here in the States, we have a lot more than we realize, right? Until we go somewhere else. In fact, a lot of people who are considered low income have 2 cars and flat screen TVs over here, right? And I think what's super cool, I was making the point on volunteering of how the volunteer can benefit, right? Based on experiences and relationships. And you're making the point here of how the people you're volunteering for can benefit. And I think that's super cool. What I've experienced in my life is really fulfillment comes from helping others, not looking at yourself or being nearly as self-serving, but serving others instead. So that's an unexpected lesson for me from this discussion, but man, that really hits home.
We've got some stories here.
Absolutely. Well, there's
more, but
I know you have another story, and it involves mixed martial arts, and it involves you once again being very giving with your time. And you mentioned earlier you wrestled in college. People listening to this do not know that you also train mixed martial artists. So I want you to share this story about, exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, this is embarrassing.
It's not embarrassing. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's to your first point. Yeah, I keep myself busy with a lot of weird stuff, and it's stress reliever. But more importantly, I've gotten really good at managing my time and just, let's do something crazy. Let's have a good story.
Let's do a podcast at 1:30 in the morning.
It's 2:24 now.
Oh.
We're getting close. Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, right?
Right.
So the story goes is, lockdowns in the Philippines started last March, and a lot of, everything stopped. A lot of professional athletes weren't able to train, et cetera, et cetera. I've got a really good friend. His name is Mark Mugenstriegel. He's one of the most famous fighters in Asia, and it's always been his dream to finally land that UFC contract and get that chance. It's something that he was working up towards, but COVID happens, life. He, with his management, got a phone call last July, and they basically explained to Mark that if he can find some way to get from the Philippines to Las Vegas, there's a highly likelihood that he would get a fighting contract, because at that time there were so many COVID restrictions and fighters dropping out. They just really needed more blood to come through. I think if you're a guy like Mark, this is life. This is
once in a lifetime opportunity, right?
Why not? And what a crazy story. If you look up his name and you kind of see the story, you'll have a chuckle. So I got a phone call a day later when he got that word, and he asked E.Jay, is there any way you can get up to Baguio, because he was 5 hours up in the mountains of the Philippines with his family.
5 hours from where you're located.
Exactly.
Wow.
And
okay.
at the time, travel restrictions were not allowed to leave the city. You couldn't even really go outside the city.
This is getting even better. Keep going.
So I made the, I hate pulling the favor card, because I'm not really one to just do me a solid. But I did make the phone call to a very important, very grateful guy. And I said, look, can you get me a travel pass so that I can leave the city and go help my guy get ready for the UFC, because he needs to fly out in 2 weeks. And he said, let me make a phone call. 2 hours later, I got the message that I need to head to the Army base near the airport, because I need to meet the one-star general that's in charge of all the travel permissions in and out of the city.
Yeah.
And, what a really, really cool group and opportunity to take a taxi, go out to the base, walk my way through. And I got to meet the general and his team, and they were laughing at me because they kind of heard the story. Oh, there's a UFC fighter. That's really cool. We can definitely help out. But before we do that, there's a rifle sitting on the desk over there. Why don't you take a few shots at the targets down that way? And
how far were these targets roughly?
They were far. They were pretty far. I'm not going to say it's 100 yards.
They weren't close.
They weren't close, exactly. I think they also heard that I was from Texas because they recognized that I was a foreigner. And so they heard that in Texas, Texas people are good at shooting guns.
We all have guns, right? We're just walking around with our rifles, shoot them everywhere. Yep. Pretty accurate.
Anyways, I'll never forget that moment because there was 3 bullets loaded into the chamber. And the feeling that I had is that if I couldn't make these 3 shots count, they would probably think twice about giving me that pass. So I walk over, I check the gun, I pull up on the sight, take a deep breath, and I could tell that all of the generals and military people were just pausing just to see if I could do it.
Yeah.
And by the grace of God, I was able to go bing, bing, bing on all 3 shots and knock down the bottles.
Dang.
And at that moment, they said, all right, get the guy a pass. He seems good to me. I called Mark an hour later. I said, Mark, you're not going to believe the story, but let's just say I had to meet a 1-star general and shoot 3 targets so I could leave the city and come up to you and get you and help you get ready for the UFC. And yeah, that's what happened. I messaged Red Bull at the time. I said, look, I have an opportunity. I'll work from home, but I need to go help this guy get ready for the UFC. And they said, that's the craziest story I've heard all day. So let's go ahead and do it. And there's actually a YouTube vlog of me and him training and kicking each other in the butt in his concrete basement with cardboard mats for a week and a half.
Wow.
And then, we scooted down to Manila a week later, got more training in, and then he sent off to the UFC and did his thing. So that's one of my more weirder stories.
It's hard to top. I think that's the definition of clutch, my friend. Right now the NBA playoffs are going on, and so we're seeing a lot of these last-second shots. But I don't think any of them determine travel up into the mountains so that their friend can have a once in a lifetime opportunity to realize their dream on Fight Island with the UFC. It's pretty epic.
Yeah.
Pretty epic.
But that's what life's about, right? It's all about the stories you say at the end of your time, and you get to say, look, I got a good story for you. You're going to love this. And I think that's where I find more fulfillment. I always tell myself, if I wanted to go down the corporate route and get the big high-paying job and be a corporate slave, I can. And there's nothing wrong with that for those that choose that route. Sure. I think for me in my life, I just took in so many weird paths and tangents that I feel like whatever I'm going to do, let me feel like I sleep really good at night knowing I made the most out of the day, or at least my time. And that's I'm weird. But well, I'm enjoying the journey, I think.
Yeah, so. I mean, it sure sounds like you're no stranger to adventure. You identify opportunities, you go after them just to see what happens, and then you also serve others along the way, which is super inspiring. And so I think that's a story that's going to resonate with a lot of people. Before I let you go here, is there anything else you want to share with people? I'd love for people to check out LuponWXC, so everybody over here in the States or internationally listening can see what you guys are doing. How can people see that? Or do you want them to?
Yeah, no, of course. I think for LuponWXC, what we do is we offer a Filipino flavor to, among other things, we focus on these international broadcasts for the big Dota 2 tournaments and big esports tournaments. We give a Filipino flavor. So for any Filipinos and Kabayans around the world that would love to have a Filipino flavor to these big esports tournaments, that's something we provide, and feel free to tune in on top of some really fun Filipino humor and a lot of fun content that I get to work in from behind the scenes.
Love that.
I guess, for me, if you feel like stalking my really weird and random stories and postings, you can just follow me on Instagram at E.Jay Miranda. And I post a little bit of piano, some fighting, some travel, and just some randomness. And I like to have a little fun. So you can definitely see all my musings and my little fun stories here and there. Like right now, I actually put out a few stories of me staying up until 2:30 in the morning for this call because life. Yeah,
that's incredible. Fun. Never a dull moment, and enjoying every moment of it. Well, E.Jay Miranda, thank you so much for joining me on the DLC Drop podcast. I'm so glad you did, and I think our audience has really enjoyed this episode. Looking forward to what you do next.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And, it'd be nice to do this maybe in the same time zone down the road. Yeah, what a pleasure and opportunity. So thank you so much, team, for having me. And thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the DLC Drop Podcast. This podcast is part of the Esports Futuri Podcast Network and produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review.